in all other videos that we've done, it's sort of like all been around. We've never touched on the fact that for a big chunk of time that I was able to function and work and have a full-time job.
Did you function? Is that what you said?
I was able to function to a level that meant that I could hold down a job and do it well. Although I've worked in three sort of like areas. I've worked in statutory in a school, I've worked in the private sector, private social care, and I've worked in a charity. So I've done the three different sectors and all at different stages in my mental illness journey, or whatever you want to call it. The experiences that I've had have been helpful in some ways, but really damaging in other ways.
So, okay, if you explain how that is.
I think in some ways they've helped me that I've had to do things that I didn't feel that I was comfortable with, you know, like talking to people and mixing with people and that kind of thing. I struggle around people like socially and stuff. So in the workplace gave me opportunity to practice and be around other people, but in a more structured environment. So I could talk about work, but in break times or in downtime sort of thing, I couldn't. I'd hide in the toilet. I couldn't do the social aspect, but I could do the talking and mixing at work and be work orientated and stuff like that. So it gave me that chance to practice about being around people and not avoid people completely.
But then so what you're saying is it helped you, but did it really help you? Because it's understanding that, you know, when you're a child and you go to school, as I believe children really don't have any rights, because when you go to school, you, as I've said before, it's must, should, have to, got to. And so quite often if there's a bereavement in the family, the child will get sent to school because it's the best place for them. It's not, but that's what some people are told, so that's where they go. Not told to deal with death or discuss death or anything like that. It's just to occupy your mind with something else. And so children often are made to perform in school, please the adults around them. It's very rarely to please them because quite often they don't want to go to school, they're forced to. So quite often when there's a problem with a child, the first thing that's looked at is, well, the marks are okay. And then if the marks aren't okay, so it seems to be that becomes the most important thing. It's not a child's well-being. It's not the fact of being a human being. It's the fact of, in the learning factory, are you performing well enough to please us? It's really not about the child. It's about pleasing others. And so the grades seem okay. So, you know, your grades have improved. So that means you're improving rather than just asking how you're improving. Mm-hmm. Do you see what I mean? But quite often when people have good grades, it's because they found an area where somebody might actually give them attention. So they've found another focus to distract themselves away from the problem that's ever growing inside of them. So that's how I interpreted what you said about being able to socialise with people. When you said, well, it helped me, it's like, did it? Because if you're hiding in the toilets, tell me how it helped you. So it sounded to me the similar thing as, I'm complying at work and doing what they want me to do, and that makes it look like I'm okay. But I'm not, because I'm hiding in the toilets.
Yeah, when you look at it like that, I think I became, you picking up on one of the phrases you used before, it enabled, for those years that I worked, I was a very good human doing.
Yes.
And not a human being.
Yes.
I was, it's fed into, it made me a good worker, because I was a people pleaser. I pushed myself and wanted the highest of standards. I knew everything. All the KPIs that I had were exceeded and exceptional. Any inspection we had, my files were called faultless. I was seen as a poster person for my role. And it's like, well, if Debbie can do this, why can't everybody else do it in the organisation? It was seen as something to look up to and good, but actually I was people pleasing. I was trying to be accepted, what I felt. I was trying to become as accepted as just everybody else. It wasn't that I wanted to be the best. I just wanted to be good enough, and I never felt I was.
And that's why you work so hard to get to
Yeah,
that.
so I worked 24/7. I was the one who was sending emails and answering emails at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Everything, you couldn't, the service that I ran and the job that I did, there were no qualms about. Everything was pretty perfect, really. But that was down to my illness, about me people pleasing, about me not giving up, and about me not being enough, and about wanting to always not believe when something I did well, that I'd always think, oh, that's just a one-off. I need to push myself even more.
So
I'll fall even further next time. So actually, I was a good worker, which makes me seem why I'm saying it was a good experience. But actually, it led me to suicide on many a times that I'd attempt suicide. It led me to self-harm. It continued my eating disorders. It exacerbated my OCDs at certain times.
Were you happy?
No, far from it. I was a nervous wreck.
Exactly.
Every time my emails beeped or my phone rang, it was like, what do they want now? What do they want now? But again, that made me good at my job, that I was always responsive. I knew the answer straight away. People would ring me and expect me to know, what does paragraph on whatever say on page whatever of the contract? Like, I could just recite it. It was.
So it became like an unhealthy environment where you worked for a company, and because you were doing well for the company, not for you. Do you see what I mean? Like, you're in school and everything isn't about you. It's about you need to comply and do what we want you to do. And it's that question, but why? What's the picture going on in the future? Why do I need to do that? So you can work because you're in a cult and you're a slave. But why am I a slave? Because you'll be forced to pay bills and to pay for things that we're going to force you to pay. And what's going to happen if I don't pay? Well, you'll be punished. And so, years ago when the slave trade, which it hasn't stopped, but the slave trade, it was that slaves were deemed as sloth. And as the King of Portugal, I think it is, had wrote a best-selling book to say how, people in Africa were gargoyles and monsters and all these things. It's like moving the spotlight. And actually, it wasn't that they were that. They actually projected that to cover up their own vile raping, killing, genocide, stealing, all these things that they wanted, because they'd run out of money. And so, they went and literally like a gang of thugs in school. And we're just going to come and we're going to take anything that we want from you, that we want to take, and then we'll go back home, we'll tell her we're the gentry and we're all these civilized people and they're savages and everything else. And it actually seemed the opposite way around. And then, you know, there was a very good trick that must have happened at some point where now we're all sloth again, but we're all equal sloth no matter what, you know, colour you are in the way that I see this world anyway, the way that I see what's going on. And so, but we're still going to take what's yours. So you can pay us taxes, and if you don't, we'll do exactly the same. We'll punish you. We'll threaten you. We'll put the fear into you. And that fear is very easy because it was already planted into you when you learnt to must, should, have to, got to when you were at school. Do you see what
I felt very much in the working environment, I felt very much same as in the school environment.
Yes.
That I felt that I wasn't an equal and I didn't have colleagues. I felt very much like a child, and everybody was the adult and everybody was the teacher who knew more than me, who was better than me. And that continued throughout college, from school, college, university. And then when I went into the workplace, it was a replica of school, hiding from people, hiding in the toilets in that non-structured time, because I was very good at functioning in a structured time when I had a task, when it was work related. I couldn't bear having a conversation with peers or anything like that. I didn't know what to do. It was frightening, it was scary, it was horrible. So I would hide. So that from from an employer's point of view, I was a really good asset. I was a really good worker, because I performed.
In people that suffered from mental health, how did they deal with that? Why, you know, because it sounds like you went on in a free work environment. So did you ever discuss needing help, or, you know?
With the one where I was longest, I was 13 years at the same company, and I progressed throughout the company into various roles and then into management. No, it wasn't. It was to say it was a social care organisation and a children's social care organisation, and one very much wanting to be inclusive of everybody. From my experience of being in there, it was inclusive of only certain things.
Do you have an example?
Yeah, like as mandatory equality and diversity training, focused on disability, as in a physical disability, and accessibility and all like that kind of thing, but also on sexual orientation. They were very good at getting like Stonewall recognition and this, that, and other, and so the equality and diversity mainly focused on those two issues. And I remember the mandatory equality, they didn't mention mental health at all, and I actually said about the answering questions, and I said, you've not touched on mental health. And it was like, all right, thank you, any more questions? And it was dismissed. There was a very big culture about your private life has nothing to do with work. You are here to work, and anything outside of that isn't discussed or isn't.
It's like putting parts of you in a box, as you do when you go to the doctors. You speak about your physical health. You go to from here. You speak about everything really. Is welcome. You go to and I guess some doctors might speak about other health as well. But ultimately, it's like the whole of you, because you're a whole being, gets put into little different departments, and you're not allowed to bring the mental health issue to work with you, even though it heavily impacts, as they don't care. So I guess literally, as an adult, they're telling you, like when you're a child, you're not always told that we don't care about the problems that you suffer at home. We don't care about, whatever goes on. We just care about you getting, getting this education that we want to give you. We don't even care about what you might want to learn either. This is what's offered. This is what we're going to give you. So that's what you get. So then it sounds like the same in work, as you said. It was like a replica of school. As again, you're getting that message. You're not that important. Work's more important than the human being, because I guess, as I say, we're worshipping the money god. And
it was very much, even though it wasn't, there was a lot of unspoken culture. It's like, don't mention mental health, don't mention anything that you're struggling with, or anything like that. But it wasn't said. But I was having therapy. When I worked there, I started on my therapy experience, going once a week. I always went at 7:00 in the morning, so it didn't interfere with any work. Work knew about it, but nothing ever interfered with work, and that was all right. And the only time it did was when I went up to management, and the managers' meeting was not at that time that I had therapy, but because it was in the Midlands, it was about 2.5-hour journey, and I couldn't get there in time for it. So I said, I can attend, but I can attend remotely on Zoom or whatever you want to, Teams or whatever it is. And it was like, can't you just miss therapy? And I just thought, to me at that time, and it still is very important to me now, but particularly at that time, that was like my insulin, my chemotherapy. I needed that to be able to function and to live. And even the doctors recognised that. And I thought, if somebody were having dialysis or somebody were having a cancer treatment, would they ask them to miss it so that they could go to the meeting? I never questioned any of these things, because there didn't seem to be that culture. And I remember once speaking to a colleague and saying, oh, I do have this diagnosis. And they were like, for God's sake, don't tell anybody. You'll be out of here straight away.
Wow.
And I know in some ways, some of my experiences were quite helpful with some of the young people that we worked with and stuff. And I was very careful to say, from my experience of working with somebody with an eating disorder, this might be an approach that works, or this might be happening to them. But there was no way that I could have opened up and said, when I had, or in my experience, it just wasn't, it was just a given that you. So I would often say, well, I've worked with somebody like this, I've worked with somebody with this issue, I've worked with somebody with this, where I was bringing on my own interpretations. And I think,
is it ridiculous to not be able to express that you're reacting normal to an abnormal situation? When you put into an abnormal situation of saying, when they say you can't bring it here or talk about it, I mean, some workplaces are very accommodating. We've evolved from there. Well, lots have anyway, even if some haven't. To not only pay for the staff through insurance, some have offered to pay, or had that level of understanding, especially if the managers or bosses have experienced it themselves and gone down that road to see it's part of being a human being, it's part of having a healthy workforce.
You are very much, like I say, the human doing.
Yes.
The doing. I can remember I'd been there a good few years, and I'm talking probably maybe about 6 or something like that. So I'd got a good track record of not having time off, of doing all my supervisions, all my PDR, everything was spot on. Even though I felt I was always going to get the sack and I was useless, there was no evidence apart from in my head to say that. And I remember once, after about 6 years of being the perfect employee, I'd been to see my psychiatrist. I went every 3 months to see her, And I went at 8 o'clock in the morning before work. And it'd been a difficult reflective session and stuff like that. And that day I was due to have my office day, my paperwork day, but there was also a duty system that you had to be on. And I just said to my manager, I said, today I've got my paperwork to do, but if anything comes up as an emergency, could you ask somebody else in the team to do it, because I don't think I'd be able to give my all to it because I'm a bit preoccupied. Yeah, that's absolutely fine, absolutely fine. 2 weeks later, I was asked to a meeting, and they'd said, could I come to a meeting about some event they were putting on, which I was involved in, some young person's event. I'm like, yeah, thinking it was a meeting on that. When I got there, it was like, we've been thinking what happened a couple of weeks ago. If that happens again, we'll take you down capability. That you're not fit to do your job. And I was like, does the last 6 years not count for anything?
Was that in the job in the caring?
Yeah.
Place? Yeah.
In the
it's amazing, isn't it, how we have these labels of caring and things like that, such as when you look at, say for example, the NHS, and it's deemed as a caring environment. And I'm not saying that not everybody's caring, but the truth is that they are the third biggest killer because of the prescription. So it's like you've got to. We just don't look at those things. We just almost as if we've got Stockholm syndrome. We just keep going back to the same people to suffer the same consequence, rather than have a look and saying, is this really doing me any good? You see what I mean? Because when you look as a whole at your past, so as the lay person, when I look at the past and I say, these things weren't around then, what's changed? What's changed is the culture of taking medication has changed. It seems to be about what we can buy, what we can sell, and where the buyers and sellers. So if you think about what do we consume, you need a consumer, don't you, to be able to sell things to. And so then it doesn't make sense to me, but I can see it when it appeared to make sense to me, because of what I was taught as well growing up. And so when you look, is that I'm a consumer of chemicals. So you look at these advertisements, which I don't watch advertisements. I rarely watch TV, and I don't watch the news or anything. But you look at these things and you say, say for instance, there's a cream and it's got a famous person's name on it. Well, famous, and I don't know who they are, but the famous person's name on it. And it's got 40% or 30% of vitamin D. And it's like, you could go buy a bag of oranges, that are organic, and rub the skin on your face, and you get 100%, vitamin D. So why would you want a jar full of chemicals? So you're rubbing chemicals on your skin. And then what we're eating lots of chemicals, as you pointed out before, of how many chemicals are in the bread bun at McDonald's, how many chemicals are in the food. And and some of the things that are put in have grown very cheaply actually for animals. One is soy, wheat, and can't quite remember the third one. And then it's made edible for us. So it's actually it's the cheapest thing that you could give, and usually those things are highlighted in the products that you buy because they're given to the animals to eat, and then they're made edible for us by adding a little bit of chicken or a little bit of beef or whatever flavouring or whatever they want to add to it. And so, but people pay quite heavy prices for these chemicals, to be eating these chemicals, because they believe they taste good. So it's like that's what happens. And then what are you going to do when you've eaten the chemicals? Well, I'm going to get dry skin because my body's got no nutritional value in it. So I'm going to get dry skin. You can rub some chemicals on your skin. And then what we're going to do when you've eaten and then before an hour passes, you're hungry again. Well, I'll just eat some more until I stretch my stomach. And then what's going to happen then? well, my body loves me so much and it's trying to keep me alive that it's going to start to move all the food away from my organs. And what's going to happen to you then? Well, then you're going to put weight on. So then what's going to happen? Well, then I'll be blamed because somebody invented calories. So then I'm going to be blamed for eating too much of it. And it's like, so what are you going to do? Well, it's all my fault. It's not the fault of the people that put the chemicals in the food. And it's not the fault of, my skin or whatever I might get on my skin. The fact that I've got microbiome and it's been killed by the chemicals I'm putting in there. And it's not the fault by the chemical in the shampoo that I'm putting on my hair. And it's not the fault of that. And it's not the fault of, these creams or anything like that. No, we're going to blame you. I'm going to blame the sun and say, oh, you got that from the sun. You've got, you've got all these things from the planet, and it's like, does that make sense? Does that make sense that this planet was made before we were and we've come on it and it's to blame for everything? It's the planet's fault you've got hay fever. Well, no, because when I stopped experimenting, as you know, with food and things like that and stopped eating dairy products, the hay fever went. So it's that of something else is more important than the human being if there's no money involved.
Yeah, I was a good human doing, and when
If there's money involved, sorry, I got that the wrong way around.
When like with that incident at work, it was like that cemented and made me even more on edge about my performance, and knowing that 6 years of being perfect hasn't got me anywhere. That one thing that I've said that maybe I can't do, and I could have done it. I would have been on duty and I would have performed well, but I just wouldn't have performed to my best because I was preoccupied and upset. So I would have performed well because I'm very good at phoning and masking anyway, and I wouldn't have allowed myself not to. But I knew I wouldn't perform at my best, which whatever. And I thought that I was doing the right thing by saying that. And at the time I was told I was, thank you for telling us, yeah, not a problem. 2 weeks later, getting me somewhere under false pretenses and then saying, right, the last 6 years are regardless of how well you've done, you do that again and we'll take you down capability. And it made me even more untrustworthy of people and believing what they said. Because it suddenly changed and I wasn't acceptable. And it made me worry each day, could I have done something today that's changed? Like I might have got
your mental health
I might have had supervision yesterday, but we know that example gave me things changed like that. So you've said I'm all right yesterday and I've still got a job. What have I done since then that might have jeopardised that? So I was consistently on edge, like I say, about every email. What's that going to be? What's that going to be? Is it going to be having a go at me? Am I going to get the sack? And my manager one of the managers was very, very good with me and understood my insecurities and stuff. And I could actually say to her, am I okay? Am I going to get the sack? And she was like, no evidence. But I couldn't trust because that trust had been broken.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't trust what she said now, and I found it very, very difficult. But there's lots of little, maybe there weren't little examples. I see that as a little example of why my experience of what people say and what they do can be very, very different. They said we're this organisation who are into equality, into diversity. We've got this award, investors in people, this, and this. But actually my experiences were different to that. And it's like,
I guess it's looking then at what people, when they said investors in people, it's like, what kind of people then are you investing in, and so ultimately it's, if money is more important, and that's what the message that you got is that is not allowed here, as as they said. And for you as well, being shocked by somebody inviting you into a room under false pretenses, kind of reminds me of when that happened to you when you were being raped, and when you were a child.
Yeah.
And so for you, it set off your anxiety, and I'm not
Mhm.
saying that did, but those two things one can be a trigger to the other.
And I guess then, as I continued working in that organisation, any difficulties that I had, I kept to myself and were masked through, were fawned through, were even, this is me dishing mental health, even what I call proper illnesses. When I had shingles, I worked through.
Yes.
And things like that. I vowed it never to let anybody know any weaknesses in me at all.
Why is that?
I was that
Why
human. I was
weakness?
that human doing,
Yeah.
and I was that good human doing.
Yeah.
And I would hide everything else because I felt it would be used against me. And I guess I did leave there after 13 years. I did hand in my notice because of the negative impact it had on my mental health, and it was impacting on my physical health. Autoimmune diseases, my eating disorders were getting worse, and things like that. And I guess the last 6 months were a bit of an eye-opener about how I did, before I handed in my, I did make it clear that I was going to hand in my notice and things. And I did once, and it was rejected because I was such a good worker. They didn't understand, and it was like, and I said I wasn't happy, and this, and it's like, oh, things will change, and this, that, and another, and they didn't. But it got to a point where I felt that I wasn't being listened to.
Yes.
And so I did say, I actually attempted suicide a week ago, or it wasn't a conscious attempt suicide. I was that overwhelmed and that upset after a day's work. I went out running, and I found myself in the middle of must have dissociated or something, but I did find myself in the middle of a dual carriageway. And I was telling the person who supervised me, and their response was, not because I said I was so overwhelmed with work or anything like that, that it was me that was seeing an issue, and I was just told, well, don't go running then when you're upset. It wasn't about why is work making you so upset or what's going on or anything like that. I was just said, well, don't go running then when you're upset.
So it's like, from what happens, just anybody's personal experience in what you're saying is that I'm handing my notice in because it's not good for my mental health, and it's like, well, no, you're not, because we're not accepting your notice. So it's that of, and you say that I'm a worker. It's like, are you a worker, or are you something else? Because we say, oh, we go to work, but that sounds like something else almost. It's the a slave to the system, really, because you really didn't matter in even your health, and you termed it as the proper illness, having shingles. And I get where you got that from, because it used to be that if we can't see it, then it doesn't exist.
It was like, I even made jokes of it and stuff like that. If I had a cold, I was proper poorly.
Yeah.
Because anything that had my mental illness, even OCD, even eating disorders, even when I were 4 stone and I died twice with my eating disorder and were brought back, it still wasn't seen as, it was seen as something you brought on yourself. It wasn't seen as serious, and I used to
as if you bring something like that.
Yeah, and I used to joke, oh, I've got a cold. Oh, I'm proper poorly today. I've got a cold. Oh, I've got a headache. Because it could be seen as well, or it could be, it would accepted.
Yeah, that's the only time you could feel validated and heard then, is if you had that. So your body, I mean, where's your body allowed to be sick from? Is it the next down that your body can be sick from? And then if it's if it's your mental health, it's not allowed. You're not allowed up there. You can have a headache up there if you like, but you can't, other than that, you can't suffer.
And to say that the areas of work that I've worked in, even though they have been in different sectors, they've always been involved people and understanding people's difficulties in schools and things like that. and with young people and with people who have experience in mental illness, it was one of the most, they were all really unhelpful experiences for me.
It seems that, you know, as well, what we do to each other, we do to everything else. So, as I've said before, that we enslave animals, we take them away from, you know, from their families because we're deemed as, egoic. Ego deems itself as more important, and so we, you know, we do to ourselves what's been done to us. We just often don't see it, and so it's ultimately when, you know, as people want to save the planet, and quite often some that want to save the planet, such as the ones in, you know, want to manipulate the weather. It's like, unless you can make a planet, because it was made before we arrived here, you have no business trying to interfere to change it. And yet they do, but it's like when you look at why they do, it comes back to the money god again, or should I say the promissory note that we all
And I think I've seen that in the
promissory note.
areas that I've worked in. Yeah, I started on an entry level with all of them and worked my way up. The higher up, they were all people orientated or young people orientated about well-being and education. But as I worked up, it became less about people and less about young people, and became more about budgets and KPIs and contracts, and it became less about the young people. It became less about the children, and they were,
and it's and
I think it fed into my own experiences that children and young people are commodities.
Exactly. And
they're objects that generate money, or that generate an income, or that generate, as being abused, that generate something, a reward for me.
Yes.
And that's a mirror that I saw as higher I went up in the organisations that I worked with, that it became less about meeting young people's needs and their well-being, and more about business.
And and it's about looking at ourselves and saying, where am I doing that? Because even when people have charity events or things like that, it becomes more about them than the actual people themselves. So they might get, you know, certain funding that the people themselves might just get the leftovers from. So the people are used, you know, lots of people that have been abused or things like that, they end up being used. I'm not saying everybody does that, but you can see it. You can see where...
you can easily be exploited and stuff like that. And I think a lot of people, particularly in social care, a lot of people went above and beyond because they were doing it for the young people. And that was exploited, that they would work over the hours, they would do this, they would do that, because they were playing on and manipulating on the ground, it's these children's lives. And so that could be easily manipulated, and and I think we see that in, and it's going on a different tangent, but going on about how people and organisations use lived experience, and about how that can be manipulated and used and exploited. Whereas if they wanted to listen to me talk about eating disorders, they'd just say, right, okay. But if it was a doctor who'd got letters after his name, oh, we'll pay you to do a lecture on eating disorders. And I think that people who have difficulties themselves, or who want to help other people, can be a little bit exploited, in my experience anyway.
So it's overall just looking at seeing the things that the way that you see them, you know, in your world, and being able to think outside of that box, to be able to come outside of of a box of, as I've said, in the culture, in the cult, there are other things, and the only thing I can really look up to is nature. And so, because it can teach you a lot. We have to end for now.